For the last decade, short-form social media content has been king. But there's a shift happening right now. Everyone's going from short-form content to long-form. Why is that happening? Even the last election was called the podcast election. What's going on? Why is long-form content exploding? My name is Jason. I own a video agency called JLS Video. We produce mainly podcasts, mainly long-form content for my clients, and this has just grown exponentially over the last year. I have a half dozen clients right now that I'm just doing podcast, video production, and editing for every single week. And it's great as a video business owner because it's consistent work. In this video, I'm going to talk about why this is important and how you can start launching your own podcast today for yourself or for your clients and how to sell it to them. Okay, so why is podcasting king right now? Why is short form social media content? Maybe it's not out of date, but maybe it's just it's becoming less prioritized than long form content. Well, everyone's gonna have a different opinion on this, of course, but for me, there's a few reasons. One is that people are just tired of short form video. People are getting exhausted by all the content that's being pushed out lately, especially with AI. It's really easy to generate short form AI generated content that looks somewhat realistic. You can have those UGC creators that are being done now where it looks like a real person, but it's just an AI person. And people on social media are flooded with content. And plus, short form content consumption is terrible for your brain. I'm not immune to it. I have had brain rot by just scrolling on my TikTok for way too long. I notice a huge correlation between my happiness levels and the time that I spend on my TikTok. So I think most of you can relate to what I'm talking about. And that's why people maybe have started gravitating towards long form podcast content. In the news recently, you'll even see that Spotify just announced that launching in 2025 is the new Spotify for Creators video platform. It's going to be amazing. It's going to allow creators to monetize and launch their podcasts, their video podcasts on Spotify, just like they would on YouTube, creating another source of revenue for your long form content. Like I said earlier, the election was called the podcast election. You can look it up. You can hear Colin and Samir talk about why this election was partially decided by podcasts. Look at Trump versus Kamala's numbers. It's crazy. There was a lot of other things going into the election, but literally people are calling it the podcast election. Another reason people are prioritizing podcast content is because it leads to better sales and revenue for your brand than short form content. So short form content, for example, content living on Instagram and TikTok, people are going to be spending 15 to 30 seconds with you on average per video, and that's not enough time to convince them to want to work with you and buy your service. So if you're a business owner and you're trying to sell a product or a service, people are investing in long form content. One person watching a 15-second video is totally different than that same person watching a 30-minute long video with you. They get to know you a lot better. They're more likely to buy from you whatever service or product that you're selling than if they just watch a short 15-second video. No, don't get me wrong, there's still a place for short form video. It's good to push people to the long form from the short form, and it's basically top of funnel content that creates bigger numbers for your long form. But again, having 100 views on your long form Spotify or YouTube podcast is way more revenue driving than 100 views on your TikTok, Instagram short form video. And so again, it's a numbers game. And right now, Spotify, and YouTube, and Apple Podcasts is a huge way to increase your leads and sales by creating that long form content. The last way that you can easily generate revenue from your podcast is once you get enough subscribers and followers and listeners to your podcast. For example, one of my clients, he gets around 2,000 to 5,000 listeners per show. And he monetizes his channel. Of course, on YouTube, we're doing monetization. But another way to do monetization is by getting brand deals and running ads in your content. And hopefully you have an audience that can convert on the ads that you're selling in your podcast. Well, first of all, if people are spending hours and hours with you and you're creating content around, let's just say, health and wellness, they're going to trust you. They're going to think that what you're saying is like really good advice. And so if you tell them to do something or take an action or buy something or buy a product, they're going to take that to heart because they really trust you. They get to know you. I mean, I saw a statistic the other day online that people on average only consume like 3 to 10 long form podcasts over the period of a year. That means like they're actively listening to only 3 to 10 podcasts. It makes sense to me because a podcast an hour long and they come out every week. You're only going to be listening to like 10 hours of podcast content every single week. Of course, there's exceptions out there, but I think that's kind of a general rule of thumb. Again, whereas on Instagram, you're going to be consuming like hundreds of different creators' content because it's only 15 seconds long. But people develop a lot more trust and rapport with their podcast subscribers because they only subscribe to a few of them. So if you sell a product or a brand, or you want to make a brand deal with somebody and you have a good audience and you have a good rapport with your audience and you tell them to buy this product, you're definitely going to get a great conversion rate. And that's why podcasts are a great way to provide revenue to you and your clients. So what are the steps to starting your own podcast? Or for example, if your client wants to start a podcast, what do you need to do? Well, the first step is you have to decide on a theme and topic around your podcast. Back in the day, you could do a podcast on anything, kind of like YouTube. You can just post vlog style content and people were just interested to know. But nowadays, it's about being hyper specific and niching down. So for example, even just saying, I'm going to do health and wellness content, that's too vague. That's too general. You got to niche down even further. So for example, you could do alternative health and wellness podcast interviews where you're speaking to legit doctors and scientists in the field. And every guest that you have on every week is from that niche, is from that field, and they're doctors and they're accredited people. That's a very specific niche podcast. That is actually the niche of one of my clients, and they do really well because it's very specific. People come to that show for alternative health and wellness content provided to them by doctors, by scientists, and they take that advice and they implement it in their day-to-day lives. It's really useful. So that's why you have to think about it from the perspective of the listener. How can you provide value to them, and how can you keep them watching every single week? It's not about getting one person to watch one video once. It's about getting subscribers to your show. Kind of like a TV show or a movie series or a trilogy. The movies are going to have some structure to it. It's going to follow the same cast of characters. It's going to have similar themes, a similar story. And it's not like you're going to know exactly what's coming up next. There's supposed to be some mystery and intrigue to it, but you at least have some sense of expectation of what's to come. Okay, the next most important thing when starting a podcast is going to be the technical back end of setting everything up and investing in equipment. Now, I have two thoughts on this. One is if you want to do it for really cheap, you can do what's called an ugly or dirty podcast. That works great. You shoot it on your iPhone. You get two phones planted on each person that's talking. If it's a two-person podcast, if it's one person, you're just talking directly to the camera, which is fine too. You just need one camera angle. Make sure the audio quality is really good though. Audio quality is probably more important than video quality in this case because the videos that live on YouTube, the shorts that are cut up from it will just push people to the long form content. And the long form content, most people will just listen to passively. Even if it's on YouTube and there's a visual aspect to it, half the people will only be listening to it in the background. And those that are watching, they get sucked in so much they don't really quit. They don't really care about the quality. So as long as it looks okay, like you're not super backlit or anything like that, and the audio is crisp, they're going to be there for it. Now, the back end side of things in terms of setting up a podcast are really important. You want to have really good titles. You want to have really good SEO for your videos. So in the description of the videos, you want to tell people what they're getting into. It's very, very similar to YouTube description, YouTube SEO, with one little catch. On YouTube, you want to make the titles more clickbaity, more like intrigue, like more like weird, like standoutish. But with podcasts, at least on Spotify and Apple, you just kind of want to tell people what they're going to be getting into. You don't have to make it as crazy as YouTube. Just tell them what they're going to get out of the show and keep it as simple as that. At first, you're not going to see much results from your podcast, especially if you don't have a following on social media. But if you stay consistent, you're going to see results. There's a stat out there from Alex Hormozy that said that most podcasts don't go above the 21 show mark. Like, I think it's something like only 5% of podcasts actually create more than 21 episodes. So if you make it past 21 episodes, you've done it. You actually are one of the 5% of people out there who've created a podcast, which I think feels a lot better than saying, oh, well, I'm just one of the millions of people out there that are making podcasts. When people say that, when people say there's millions of people out there doing podcasts, what they mean are there are millions of people out there starting podcasts, not continuing to release podcasts week after week. It's a lot of work to do these shows because most podcasts, the ideal runtime is like 30 to 50 minutes. Like that's really going to be your sweet spot, like at least 30 minutes, ideally 50 minutes to an hour, because that really allows people to really get engaged and go deep into the topic and kind of lose themselves in the story that you're talking about. The last most important step before starting a podcast is actually deciding on who the guests are going to be on the podcast, and trying to get big, important people on your show is really important, and it could help your growth in the beginning if you're just starting out. If you can't get big, top, important people, and you're just doing it with your friends, that's fine too. But you're going to see quicker results if you can get people who are in your niche, who are really well known and have a big online presence. Again, the whole idea is podcast is bottom of funnel content. You're pushing people there through your top of funnel content, through your short Instagram videos, through your Facebook posts, through your short sizzles on YouTube Shorts. All that stuff is just to push people to the long form, which will live on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. So again, let me just break it down for you how to start the podcast from top to bottom, because the last step is the most important and I haven't gone over that yet. Once you decide on your theme or topic, you get your guests, you decide on your post frequency, which really should be once a week, every single week. Make it consistent. Try not to skip as many weeks as possible. You can always batch shoot it, so you can shoot like 4 days straight, 1/4 of the year. You can release like once a month or so, but it's less desirable. Really, every week is kind of the most ideal, because then people are going to keep remembering and keep coming back to your show every week. Whereas if you do one a month, they might forget about it and it might not be at the top of their mind. So once you set on those things and start creating the content, the next most important thing is the distribution of the content. So obviously you want to be putting your long form video and audio podcasts onto YouTube. YouTube is a growing platform. It's the best way to release your podcast content. But you also want to do Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Spotify can do video. And in fact, like I said earlier, in 2025, they are releasing the Spotify for Creators video element of it. So make sure you do video on Spotify. And then Apple Podcasts obviously is just audio. So you can just strip the audio from the podcast, release it on Apple. But again, you're not going to be getting a lot of new subscribers who are going to be browsing and discovering you from Apple Podcasts or Spotify, at least for now on Spotify. But again, social media is the best way for people to discover your podcast. So you have to let people know about it, and then they'll listen to it on those various channels. But you can't just post them into the ether on Spotify or on Apple. YouTube is good because it's got the shorts element of it and discoverability. But again, discoverability is low on Spotify. It's low on Apple, at least for now on Spotify. Who knows how that's going to change over the coming months and years. But you have to make sure to tell people about your podcast. So those are all the most important steps that you need in terms of launching your podcast. Just make sure it's really high quality. Make sure that every episode, the opening 30 seconds, you're going to tell people what you're going to tell them about. Keep it really exciting and interesting. I usually have my clients write out those opening 30 seconds or do it in terms of like a few different takes on camera. And the rest is just free-flowing conversation where you're talking about a larger topic. But those first 30 to 45 seconds are essential to drag people in. And so similar to the YouTube format, you have to give credibility of who you are. You have to remind people why they're here to watch the show and kind of give an overview of what you're going to talk about. Now, a couple bonus tips here. If you are working with a content creator who has a big platform and you want to get more eyeballs from their Instagram over to their podcast, do what we do for our clients. So some of our clients have big followers on Instagram. So we take a clip from the podcast, the best clip, or maybe the intro clip, we zhuzh it up, we add some exciting B-roll, some captions, we have them posted on their Instagram page, and then we use what's called an auto DM strategy using ManyChat or Go High Level or any of the other features, and tell people comment the word X, whatever that word is below, and we'll send you this podcast. We'll send you the show. But you don't even have to frame it as like, we'll send you this podcast. Say like, we'll send you the answers, or we'll send you the things that you've been wondering about, XYZ. If it's educational, if it's entertainment, it's more like, we'll send you the podcast where we have fun and do XYZ. But make sure that you set up a strategy like that, because just telling people to click the link in your bio and go check out your show is it's a more passive way in doing things. So it's really important to be active in promoting your show on social media every single week. That's it. That's pretty much all you need to know for your podcast. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below if you have any questions for me and you want me to go over anything else. Again, my name is Jason. I own a video agency here in Los Angeles, and I love creating content. Thanks so much.